All right. Good evening. We'll let some people start entering in here before we get going. We got a good crowd here today. And it's looking like it was a good mix of students and parents and maybe some counselors. So I'll kind of speak to all those viewpoints, though mostly through the lens of students here. Uh, going. Okay. So welcome everyone. My name is Matt Kiesner. I'm an instructional designer here at Appleruth, and I've been working on the curriculum team, building the new materials for the SAT and PSAT, and those digital changes. You may have seen me. I've been hanging out with Jed a lot, being his wingman. We're talking about all these changes in the SAT, but it's just going to be me tonight. And we're going to be talking specifically about the digital PSAT scores for any um, uh, students who took the PSAT in school in October. All the scores are out. The second batch came out today. So everyone should have those scores. And if you don't have your scores or don't have your student scores, it might just be an issue of just checking on the College Board's website or through one of their little apps there. So we got a Q&A here. I see already I got a question on there, which I got a slide to answer that. But if you have any questions in there, feel free to throw them in, and we'll have a little Q&A session at the end. So if you're not familiar with Appleruth, our why is we change students' self-beliefs, you'll change your lives. And we offer three kinds of things. We do academic tutoring, which might be APs or IBs or middle school math, writing skills. We do test prep, and that's going to be the topic of tonight, understanding the PSAT and then how to understand the scores and then go on to the next step. And then we also do executive function coaching, which is helping students with planning and decision making and stuff. And we do plenty of webinars on that as well. So tonight we'll be seeing we're talking about understanding the PSAT score report. That score report is definitely different than it had been in previous years. Understanding how the PSAT connects with college admissions. What are the next steps? Talking most specifically to juniors, but I think it also applies to other students, for sophomores and freshmen who took that PSAT. And then we'll have that Q&A there. So we'll start with talking about the score report and understanding, what the information you get from this, what's provided. So if you're trying to find the PSAT scores, they're connected to the College Board account. So if I think I saw a question there, like, how do you get them? Is you can go to collegeboard.com and then enter in the student's account. The student has to have an account. Like, you can't take the PSAT with Blue Book unless you had a College Board account. And I know that for a lot of students and a lot of schools, in the week prior to the PSAT, they maybe had a homeroom where everyone downloaded Blue Book and they made sure everyone was linked up, because especially with being a digital test, it's not, you can't just put your name on it and then send it off. So that's the answer. Is going into a College Board account and finding that information there. And then when you go in there, it'll just be my scores, and there'll be the PSAT. It's pretty easy to find once you're there. So trying to make a sense of this new score report. We got it's going to be the composite score is going to be at 1520, and then that's 760 of those points are for the reading and writing section, and 760 are for math on there. What they're going to offer you some percentiles. These percentiles are going to be of the grade that you're in, and not not like all students. So for this one, this student is in 11th grade, and you can see the percentiles. But if you're in 10th grade or 9th grade, it'll shift. And obviously the average score for a ninth grader is going to be lower than the average score for 11th grader because, less schooling, less math on there. And you see like a change from the previous one is that there's not subscores. Previously, there was a reading and writing subscore. They have done away with that. And to understand why it's out of 1520, that the College Board has decided to take the PSATs and have this sort of vertical scaling on here. So there is the PSAT 10 and the PSAT NMS QT, which is the National Merit thing. They're the same style of test, and so there's they've kind of shifted the scale down from that 1600 to 1520. And then there is a PSAT 8-9 that is like for 8th graders, 9th graders, and that is has far fewer concepts on math. And so the scores are even, you could definitely put it, take this additional content and push it in between the PSAT 8-9 and the PSAT 10 and National Merit on there. But that's sort of the understanding of like, that's their justification for it. I think tonight we're going to be talking a lot about like their justifications, and not necessarily that their choices are like universally agreed as correct on there. I think some of them are going to be, we're going to run across things like, oh, that was a choice they made. And I'll do my best to explain it, but I may not be able to justify it. So this is what the score report looks like. So this is a similar column on the left as there. There's this knowledge and skills, and this is the only feedback given about where the student got things right or wrong. And then on that third column is going to be for the National Merit, which is its own metric. I've got slides, to kind of break apart all these things. So if you're like, why are we talking about these bars? But we'll come back to it. And so I think they are providing National Merit scores for all students. I have not seen a freshman report, but I did see one for a sophomore. So know that like everyone's getting one of these selection index scores. So try to understand this, these knowledge, skills, and data. I've already seen some questions in the chat. Is how do you know like what you got right and wrong? And the answer is that with the test becoming digital and the test becoming shorter and the test becoming adaptive, the advantages that the student gets is that it is a shorter test, and there's fewer questions. It takes less time to do. The sacrifice is that you do not get you really get very little feedback going through on how you did. So instead of telling you, oh, there were this 57 or 54 questions in the reading and writing modules, and you missed 10 of them. They're no longer doing that. Instead, they're giving it into these the 7-bar system, and they've been consistent with this. This is the first time the PSAT has been administered, but students internationally have been taking this test since March, and this is the score report that I think they're going to be using going forward for the foreseeable future. I don't foresee them getting more information on that, and so it's a little frustrating to read because if you notice everything has a range on it, right? And so if you're looking down at the geometry and trig, they're saying it's from 4 to 6 questions, and this student got 6 out of 7 bars. But what does that mean, right? Is that 5 out of 6 questions right? Is it 3 out of 4 questions? Like, how is this being determined? And I can see it being a frustration for families that that are trying to understand that. But the next slide has a little more justification, but it's important that the more bars you have filled in, the better the student did on that domain. So the big question is, why are they doing this? So to kind of peek behind the curtain on here is that the digital PSAT and the SC are using item response theory, which is a fancy term for basically saying that different questions have different weights, and they're weighing across multiple metrics. It's important to understand that this test is no longer like a linear scale, or and the idea of like a classic test where you get it right, you get a +1. If you get it wrong, you get a 0. It's not doing that. Each question has value across multiple metrics and this can involve like outside knowledge, which could be either could be vocabulary in reading writing. It could be math concepts. In there you have to know certain things. How guessable a question is one thing that they look at. The number of steps you need, like they've sort of try to quantify what's going on behind the scenes of this. And so these questions are having these different weights, and then they're using that to calculate the score. So the problem with trying to present, hey, you missed 10 questions on the reading writing, and this is your score, is that one student missing 10 questions and then another student missing 10 different questions will produce different scores on there, and you can't build a scale like you would. One things we've been doing in an analysis for years is looking at like, oh, if you get all the questions right, you get an 800. If you miss one question, you get a 780. If you miss two questions, you get a 770. If you miss three questions, you get a 750. And looking at like how many points off. That sort of analysis is something that I think people are trying to do, at least in terms of when I've been looking over Reddit comments about like people talking on r/SAT. But I can tell you that that really does not play here. And rather than talk about like what I'm saying, I'm using some behind the scenes information on this, is that they've decided rather than try to educate the consumer, the families, the schools, about why there's this difference, they've decided to just essentially avoid the issue and not give you that feedback. I know that that's a frustration with this, but that's how the digital PSAT and digital SAT will be. They're not going to provide feedback on which questions you missed. You're not going to get to see the test again. This is the choice that they've made. And you cannot say that if you get X number of questions right, you'll get Y score on there. Hopefully that answers, I think, a question that some of you have already had in the Q&A there. Is that because they know that two different students could get the same number of questions but have really different scores on there, and that is it's the sacrifice that is being made for having that adaptive test and having that more efficient experience. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. I really can't get there's really not more to say about that. One other thing you'll notice is that it does not tell you which section you got into. And so if you're trying to determine whether you got into the upper level or lower level second modular, they provide no feedback on that. And if we were looking at the score back here, especially in this math of 610, that student could have gotten either upper or lower modules. It's unclear. The reading writing is probably upper module because it's a little bit higher, but it could actually be the lower module. It's unknown, and they don't tell you how you did on either module, right? They're not providing any of that feedback. Okay, so next thing we're talking about is for the national merit, and I know there's some interest in this as well. So the PSAT is a way for 11th graders to enter into a competition to receive national merit recognition. And if everything goes, and you go through the steps, you'll eventually get a scholarship. The scholarship is not a lot of money by contemporary college costs, but getting that national merit, become a national merit scholar, is basically the best thing you could one of the best things you could do for a college transcript. It is a delightful gold star on the applications, and can lead to some very nice merit-based scholarships that are specific to certain schools. But it's important that, like, if you're a sophomore and you got a perfect score on the PSAT, good for you. That was, you did really well, and you obviously, are great at this, but you're not going to get a national merit. You'd have to, hopefully you'll do just as well when you're a junior, and then push that into national merit. But they are giving you that predictive score. So here's the sort of the process there. So they're going to be grabbing about 16,500 of the top performing students. Students who don't make the cut, you can still get commended, which does not lead to any sort of scholarship or anything, at least directly, but it's still a good thing to have on one's college transcript. And then there's going to be a little bit of a weeding out process. Some people aren't eligible for whatever reasons, so it does kind of trim off some folks. And then the last part is involving essays, and you need a confirming score with a real SAT. So that a student who didn't had a great fluke of a day, they're trying to weed those folks out that are really good guessers on a test one time. So it's not a lot of students are going to get to that final scholarship, and only about a little less than 9,000 per year are going to receive the recognition of the awards. So it is very much a selective group. And if you were someone who was hoping for that and your PSAT score didn't get there, it's completely fine. Like you are still going to go to a college. You can still get a scholarship for college. It's just it is a one-time opportunity. Look at that, only 0.05% of students get to that point. So there's do not make it into more than it is, because you can still get into a top tier college. And it was think of it as like one opportunity for success, but that there are many other opportunities. So let's explain this selection index, because this is another odd choice. So instead of just using the straight PSAT scores, for years they've been using the special index, which is out of from 48 to 228. And where this is coming from is like to do the history of the SAT and PSAT. Going back to 2005, the SAT ballooned up to 2,400 points, where reading, math, and writing were separate sections, and then the writing also included an essay. And the National Merit Corp, they were like, okay, cool, that's what we're going to do. We're going to split it into threes. In 2015, the PSAT switched back to where it was a reading and writing scores, and they had some sub scores on those sections. And the National Merit kept it where like the reading and writing sub scores were weighted equally, like the sub scores were equally with math. Now with the new digital test, there are no sub scores. There's not a reading and writing sub score, because the reading and writing questions, if you're not sure what I mean by that, the reading is reading comprehension, the writing is a grammar. Those questions are now integrated into modules that combine reading and writing, and they don't give you any sort of sub scores other than those bars. But the National Merit has just kind of doubled down on that thinking. And so the way that the selection index score is created is that they take that reading and writing score and they double it, and then they add it to math. And then the whole thing's divided by 10 to get you into that 228. And this to me seems like an odd choice. That you think about in contemporary desire for jobs and the health of the nation, you think you'd be wanting to push a little bit harder on math and STEM skills. That was their choice. I can tell you, and this is some information that I found in a closed door meeting, that the College Board had no input with this selection index. They administer the test. National Merit set the cutoffs, and they said that there was really no communication between the two departments on there. Okay, so hopefully understand where the score is coming from. I did have a student I worked with personally who crushed the math, got a 760, and did not. I mean, it was like a 680, 690 on reading and writing, but because of that double weight, like for the state he lives in, probably not going to hit national merit. And that's a little frustrating because obviously, like we should celebrate that he got a perfect math score, right? So every state's gonna have a unique cutoff on there. And we can look at prior years, but I think it's important to recognize that this is a new test. How they test reading and writing is significantly different. They've did some changes in math about giving Desmos, and how they kind of phrase questions is different. And I think it's too early to be, oh yeah, if you get the score, you're definitely in. I think we can say that, yeah, it's likely you're in. Or if you can look at prior years, and if it's several points above that, yeah, that seems very, very strong on there. But it is unknown, and it's going to be a while before this information gets reported. Like you're not going to get national merit confirmation until like September of next year. It really takes a long time on there. The other thing is that the commended scores are based on a nationwide ranking, so that can be good for students who are especially in states that have really high cutoffs, like Massachusetts, New Jersey, California. Those ones you could still hit commended even though that state cutoff is on there. So there's definitely people from all over the nation. I can't rattle off all 50 cutoffs from prior years. I would recommend a Google search for your state and the national cutoff for current seniors, and then just know that it may wiggle a little bit, and I would think maybe you might go up or down a point or two. But if you're somewhere near that, then wait and see, and wait. National Merit will contact your schools, and mostly just make sure that you're actually eligible, so that you're not like move to a different country or something. But it is going to be mostly a wait and see kind of game. Okay, so what I want to go over is just give some general advice for the content domains, and say like if you missed questions in there, so you have fewer bars that are filled in. These are my sort of general suggestions of like where you could apply study to go with this. So we'll go over all 8. It's really the only analysis I can do with these limited scoreboards. So we'll start with the reading and writing. We're just going to go in the order of the test. So the first one is craft and structure. These are the first questions on reading and writing modules. It's going to be words and context questions, which is going to involve a blank, and you put the correct vocabulary in there. It's going to be these text structure and purpose, which these questions either ask about an underlined sentence, like what is its function of that underlined sentence, or something like to describe the overall structure of the text. And then it also includes the cross-text connection, which is the one comparison question on the reading and writing sections. So on this one, obviously, if you're missing points there, trying to improve range of vocabulary, and especially words that are like they're not testing on the rarest words, but like words I think of strong academic function in there. But reading more college level literature and college level like articles, and not necessarily like prose, but like reading like an article about like scientific discovery stuff, like kind of getting exposure to that is going to be helpful. Making sure to identify logic clues within a text, that there's definitely a puzzle element to words and context, and looking for like it could be contrast or a cause and effect or an example, and kind of trying to learn to build those those logic clues that will also be useful on the text structure and purpose and cross-text connections questions. And then for those last two, especially, is being able to summarize the goals and claims of a text. The cross-text connections is always one comparing what one author thinks about another author's idea. And then text structure and purpose, like what was the goal of this passage or poem or something. Like it could be all kinds of things on there. So those are my my suggestions for those on that. The next ones are information and ideas. These are like the most kind of reading comprehension questions. So central ideas and details are just like straight up classic reading comp. What's the main idea, or what do we know about this character if it's about like from a story. So you have the two kinds of command evidence questions. Textual ones are where you are giving a like finding evidence that supports a claim, and then quantitative is the ones with graphs and tables. And then inference is where you have to pick the best the selection for the last sentence of the text. They sort of, it pulls these things together. So on these ones, focus focus on the goals and claims. I guess be really important for the textual and the inference questions. Make sure like to like think about working on evaluating evidence. Like, does this evidence, is this the best support for an idea? Because those are really important on those command evidence questions. Being comfortable reading graphs and tables. None of those are going to be too complex on the SAT, but making sure like to remember, oh, I need to know what the axes are or the rows and columns, and make sure that I pick information that's relevant to whatever the text is saying. And then making like logical inferences, not doing something too grandiose. For these kind of questions, it's just the next step. For the standard English conventions, these are the grammar questions or the writing questions. There are two general categories. There's boundaries, which is going to be testing on clauses and punctuation. And then form, structure, and sense is going to be kind of all kinds of things: the verbs, pronouns, apostrophes, plus modifiers. And so obviously knowing English grammar rules is important on these. So we're reviewing the rules of grammar, being strong on the uses of commas, semicolons, and colons, and knowing which ones, which are interchangeable and which are not, being able to identify different kinds of clauses. And then, just like for the form, structure, and sense, to just, working on trying to find the subject of a verb or the antecedent for a pronoun, or being comfortable with apostrophe usage. So like those, there's very few ideas tested on the standard English conventions on this test, especially compared to the old SAT or the ACT, which has a lot more rules. And our last one for reading and writing is expression of ideas. So these are going to have transition questions, and these are about picking the correct, they're kind of like words in context, but it's only transition. So should you use however, or should you use furthermore? And then there are these rhetorical synthesis questions, which are bulleted lists, and you have to kind of like pull information from that list and build a like a sentence that sort of synthesizes those ideas. So this one, obviously improving your range of transitional words. And I know that we all know, how to use but and yet and so and however, furthermore, and stuff. But they're like, I find that for some of my students, they need to have a little bit more vocabulary review on transitions. When they see moreover or subsequently, and they don't feel confident in those definitions, I think I don't know that most students are going to need like a heavy vocabulary review to do well on the SAT. But I would say that there is learning transitional phrases and words and phrases is definitely a high value, because they also show up in like the logic for other sections, like the words in context will often use, it was like this, however, it became blank. And so you'd have to, know that you need something for contrast. And also focus on the questions asking, especially the rhetorical synthesis questions. And then other issue, if you're scoring lower on this, is these are the last questions of the reading and writing modules. So maybe it was a time issue, right? That's something to question, because we know those rhetorical synthesis questions are going to be the last ones. And maybe like, ran out of time. And so better time management would, you could answer these if you had the time for them, because they're not necessarily difficult on there. And like, to give you a little hint on the rhetorical synthesis ones, if you really just focus on what the question's asking, you don't have to really learn the list. And in fact, I could say that you don't even have to read the list, which feels weird. I don't usually say that on a reading and writing section, but on this one, if you kind of just focus on the questions asking and evaluate the answer choices, you can get pretty far with that, rather than try to learn everything that's on that list, because there's going to be irrelevant information on that. All right, so we'll move on to the math section here. So algebra is basically be algebra 1 skills. There's going to be single variable equations, linear functions, graphing linear things. And so for a lot of students, it might have been a couple years since you've taken algebra 1. So making sure just reviewing, like, be comfortable with linear equations and how to determine slope and perpendicular slopes, and working with linear systems. This is important. Making sure, like to write down your work on there, and especially for, like, when you're doing single variable algebra expressions, like you just have to manipulate things algebraically and maybe to isolate for a term. Make sure you're writing things down and using the paper and not skipping steps. That can be a big cause of mixing up a question. Being able to use Desmos, making sure that you know how to use Desmos to graph linear expressions and what that means. So if you have a system of equations, and if you're looking for a solution, it's where they cross, is where that point of intersection is the solution. And if you put that in Desmos, you can just see it and then click on that point. And then I'm going to be saying this pretty much on all the math ones. Double check that you answered the question asked. Maybe you found the X value for a system of equations, but they wanted the Y value. And the X value will be one of the answers, because of course it is. Now, advanced math is going to be like polynomials, graphing parabolas, exponential modeling, a lot of other miscellaneous things. And for some of you, if you're these are mostly algebra 2 skills, and for some of you, I'm sure you've taken algebra 2 and you might be in pre-calculus or even calculus. But others are going to be in algebra 2. And if you're younger than a junior, and maybe you're taking algebra 2 next year, this is obviously going to be probably an area where you're missing more questions, right? Because you just have not taken that math. So if you're in algebra 2 now, you should expect by spring you should do better in this section, just because you'll have months more of math that are under these topics. And so I would, rather than worry about getting that score now, the next time you can take the SAT is March. So there's plenty of time, and it might make more sense to take it in May or June to give you to get that full math set under your belt. But how to improve, making sure to be comfortable with parabolic equations and quadratics, and knowing how to read look at the equation and extract information. Being able to distinguish between factors and solutions for an expression. Factors are like when you pull apart from the equation. Solutions what you see on a graph, and like that's something they really want to test. And that's a way that they can use Desmos. Obviously you can graph it, but you have to know, like, when it crosses the x-axis, that is a solution, but that solution tells you a factor. I think, and being able to be really comfortable with that idea is important. And then double checking that you answer the question asked. Like, I'll say that every time. There's a little bit of these problem solving and data analysis questions. This can be dealing with averages, percentages, probability, and then a little bit of like what they call study design, which is like, if we did a scientific observation, what can we learn from this observation, and does that make sense? And so a lot of these are like, I don't think you need to take AP Stat for these things, but a lot of them are like, obviously pre-high school data sort of things, mean, median, mode, adjusting percentages, very basic probability, nothing too advanced. And a lot of the study design can be conquered with just some scientific common sense and a little bit of skepticism. So how to improve this? Desmos actually is really good for statistics. You may not know that if you need to figure out the mean of a number set, you can literally type in the word mean in the input of Desmos and put a parenthesis and then just put in your number set with commas in between, and it just calculates the mean for you. Does the same thing with median. I can do it with range and mode, though. I mean, I don't know why you have to put in for mode. It's the most common number. But make sure you also read the question carefully, so that you know what it's solving for. Because you could deal with compound percentages, or like setting up a proportion correctly. Again, writing down your work if you're having to like set these things up, to especially for things where percentage and probability we need to do multi steps. And then I'm always gonna say it: double check that you answered the question asked. Make sure that you found like the classic, like an object is on sale. Did you figure out the price that you paid, or the price that you didn't pay, right? With the savings versus the actual cost, right? Because that's an easy way to mix some stuff up. And then there's going to be a little bit of geometry and trig. So the trigonometry is really just going to be SOHCAHTOA with maybe a dash of radians. It should be primarily the kind of trig you would see in a geometry class, and not necessarily like a pre-calculus, like trig heavy course. One thing to remember is that they give you formulas. There is a formula button on Blue Book, and it does pull up a formula. So you're not going to use all those formulas per test, so it's easy to forget that those formulas are on there. I would review your basic SOHCAHTOA trig and make sure that you're comfortable with the right triangle, sine, cosine, tangent trigonometry. Again, read the questions carefully, write down your work, double check that you solved what it asked for, because if they ask you for the area of a circle, the circumference is one of the wrong answers, because of course it is on there. All right, so those are all the if you're missing bars on something, that would be my suggestions on those. So we'll transition into talking about PSAT and college admissions in here. So how important is PSAT? Not really. It's not very important. You cannot use the PSAT to apply to college. The most the PSAT can do is enter you into national merit. And if that was never like a goal or a likelihood, that's fine. Like now more or less how you'll do on the SAT. And you also know that with this new test showing up, what the like, how do you feel about it, right? Did you like using Blue Book? Did you like having Desmos as your calculator on there? Did you like having short texts? And you now have that exposure, and that can help you make those choices in to what test to take for real. So you might be asking, what's the difference or similarity between the digital PSAT and the digital SAT? They're basically the same. They have the same number of questions, the same structure. They both have 2 modules of reading and writing and 2 modules of math. The same question types. Everything we just went through in that list of like the words in context and command of evidence, and how much it tests on algebra and advanced algebra and so on. The same, and the same testing platform. You won't have to reinstall anything to take to use the same device you used for your PSAT. The only differences is that there are some math concepts that only show up on the SAT. Like graphing circles is one that is only on the SAT. Some more advanced factoring dealing with like higher power stuff. And then perhaps the vocabulary is a little tougher on the reading section. I worked a lot on the reading writing section for the as we're developing these materials. I have a little bit of an instinct on there, but I can't say like something where I can make a hard like, oh yeah, this is an SAT only word versus that could show up in the SAT or the PSAT. But even for these like advanced concepts, we're talking like 2 or 3 questions per test. Is the difference. It's not a big difference. If you were to take a practice SAT on Blue Book, you would say it would feel very normal to that PSAT experience. But it's also important to recognize that like the the digital PSAT and SAT have moved away from the ACT. Previously, they were more similar, and the ACT is not really making a big move this year, or has not announced any big move, and so we can kind of see the differences now. So on the PSAT, on the SAT, you have short reading passages, like about a paragraph. ACT, you have longer reading passages. The SAT tests only a few grammar rules. The ACT tests more grammar rules. On math, it's going to be mostly focusing on algebra and graphing skills on the SAT. The ACT is going to has a wide range of math, going all the way from like middle school concepts up to pre-calculus, and has a very large variety. ACTs also have a science section. That is explicitly testing on your ability to make inferences with scientific data. The SAT has a little bit of that in those reading and writing questions, but not much. ACT also has an optional essay. I'll give you a great piece of advice: don't take the essay. It's on the ACT. It's worthless. Schools don't care about it. So the SAT is going to have that digitally adaptive testing experience, just like the PSAT. ACT is going to be a linear paper-based test that and maybe you like paper and like be able to write on a page, then you get that option there. And the SAT is 2 hours 24 minutes of testing time, and the ACT is 3 hours and 5 minutes, right? So that's without the essay. So it's a longer experience. I would say that the choices that the College Board has made with the PSAT and SAT seem to be more student friendly than they've taken a lot of the grievances about standardized testing, about it's long, it's boring, and by being digital and adaptive, they've tried to reconcile those. So you can use the PSAT to kind of help you decide, because the PSAT is basically the SAT experience, and it maybe you didn't like it. I mean, I'm a little hot trot to it because it's the new thing, so it's kind of exciting. But the ACT is still a popular test, and some schools will administer a pre-ACT. That's not all that common, but if you do have those scores, you can definitely do like a one-to-one comparison on there. But for a lot of students, it might involve just taking a practice ACT. And you can definitely compare an ACT practice test to a PSAT and get a comparison there. There is a score converter. We have it on the Alpworth website. You can use it for free if you go to alpworth.com and you go up to like free resources. Like it says SAT versus ACT. In fact, I used it today to help figure out where a student should go. And you can convert it either way. So that'll allow you to see, because they have very different scales. The ACT is out of 36 points, where the SAT is out of 1600. And so if one is, if you convert everything to SAT scales, and these are concordances that both tests agree with, that if one is like greater than the other, then you should probably go towards that one. And there, a lot of students are going to fall within like margin of error. They're really similar. Then I would go like, what does the heart desire? Like which test do you want to focus on, and put that effort into? And I think that's something where I support student choice on there. So let's talk about these admissions thing, right? So that the admissions process, there's two kind of things. There's like these indexes. So there's like quantitative stuff, which is like your high school GPA, and things. And then there's qualitative, admissions essays, recommendations, and things you do. And they're both important, right? In these things. And the SAT and ACT is just one component of that, and how important it is really depends on the school these days, right? We live in a test optional world, but we're finding that unless a school is literally test blind, which does describe some schools, test optional does not mean no test preferred. And having good scores is still an advantage to a test optional on there. But in terms of like where the tests, like if they accept SAT or ACT scores, and there are some schools that don't, but otherwise they're universally accepted. You don't have to worry about like it used to be somewhere where one state would be ACT only, one state would be SAT only. For years and years, they've both all schools see these equally. Um, and so this is typically, testing is done in the junior year. I would not recommend waiting until senior year to do it of this. So if you're a sophomore, I mean, I think uh, what's going to be the most important is keeping your GPA, trying your best to get into either AP track or IB curriculum, whatever matches your school, or honors programs, and those sort of things, and kind of working towards towards that increasing your academic threshold versus like spending your time studying for the SAT. And so in the fall of your junior year, I mean, if you're in advanced courses, it might be fine to take the SAT or ACT and just get those scores done. That also might make sense for certain kinds of sports students. If you're on a touring club and soccer all spring, the fall or the winter might be the time to get that done. But by spring of junior year, that is typically the best testing time. If you're in algebra 2 in your junior year, that is probably like waiting till the spring of junior year is probably the best option in terms of the math section of having the most amount of math on there. It's also like the PSAT is once a year, but the SAT or ACT can be taken multiple times a year. So it's good to plan for multiple tests. It is quite often that the first test is not the best test because it's new, and maybe nerves and anxiety got to you, and that's understandable. So you don't want to wait to the last minute to test your first time. That's a really unpleasant experience is being a senior trying to prepare for the SAT or ACT while you're doing your applications. I just had to shepherd a student through that process the last couple months, and that was not by my choice, right? That was just it was what it was, but I could see her stress, right? And there's lots of opportunities. So I apologize if this is confusing, but if we look at the December tests are coming in a few weeks, it's kind of too late to sign up for them, and that SAT for December is the last time to take the paper test, and I would say it's probably too late to do that, and then that paper test is being retired, full stop, not optional. But you can take a ACT in February, you can take a SAT in March, ACT in April, and SAT in March. You can take both the ACT and SAT in June. They're in back-to-back weekends, so it wouldn't be the same day. There is a lone ACT in July, like the middle of July, and then it starts up in fall. There's a late August SAT, September ACT, and then both the ACT and SAT in October, and then that will always be the PSAT as well. So if you're a sophomore and you did well in the PSAT as a sophomore, you should put effort into it and see, maybe you can get towards a national merit or something next year, and then in November SAT, which was already happened this month. That was in the the first Saturday. And so like trying to figure out, there's not one timeline that works best for all students, and I don't really want to go through all the options of this, but it's looking like you could start in the summer, and if the summer is your time of having more free time, so like, hey, I'm gonna focus on studying over the summer, and then work towards either fall or spring test and kind of do refresh things. You can also study start in the winter, and then test through the spring and fall. There's lots of different ways to do that. And one thing I would say that to really think about it is what are the things going on in your life that are not the SAT and ACT? Are there sports teams that you play on? If you're taking 5 APs, don't plan to take the May SAT because that's right with that same period. Why add that stress to you, right? If you're taking a bunch of APs, you plan accordingly. Where you take the June test, right, and you've already finished all your AP classes. One thing also to note is that in-school testing has become more popular, and this is when basically your school buys you the test. And in that, if that happens, you should take that test. It would be in the school day, and they can purchase it in the ACT and SC. I know that the College Board is pushing the digital test to be an in-school test, and really the PSAT was the dry run for that in October. So keep an eye out for that, because that, there's the advantages that your school already set it up for you, and I assume was paying for it, or there might be a discounted, they may ask you to pay for a fee. I don't know. Schools are all weird, but I should be cheaper than a weekend test. You don't have to wake up any earlier on a weekend, right? You didn't ruin a Saturday morning, and it's going to count just like any nationwide test. So there's no penalty or like it's seen as lesser or anything. So that's something that the schools can set up, and that would probably start. I would imagine those to be in late spring, because they're going to have to wait till that March test, and then I'm thinking things that should show up in April or May or maybe June if you have a school that goes later into the summer. All right, so how do you take these things? SAT, you register for the College Board. If you have a PSAT scores, you have a College Board account. The ACT is a completely different company. They are Coke and Pepsi. You needed to set up with act.org. You probably don't have an account there unless you've been doing some weird ACT stuff, but ACT has less of a vertical integration amongst the school. They've tried to kind of have like tester lower or above, and never really, the market's never bared out on that. So you just have to go to ACT and build your own profile there. It's supposed to know that if you have LDs and if you have accommodations like a 504 plan or IEP, that you can use those in on the SAT or ACT. The SAT is nice. Once you basically get the combination to the College Board, they apply to AP exams, PSAT, and SAT all together. It's a good deal. The ACT is a little that you have to reapply every time you take it, but once you sort of get it, it's fine. But knowing that trying to get it, especially if you have not been using accommodations regularly in school, or have a psych profile that is recent, is going to be harder on the ACT. I think part of that is that ACT is a fast test. You have to make decisions quickly. So having extended time is a value, and I think that they recognize that more people are likely to ask for it when they may not be deserved on there. In terms of the Blue Book, the Blue Book can provide all the accommodations of extended time, text to speech, big font, whatever you need on there. All right, and then set realistic goals. Looking forward, like what schools are you applying to, right? Don't just try to get a 1600 or a 36 on the ACT because you could. Like what score for the schools you're looking for would make you happy. And so, looking at these these rankings, is that if you kind of set this up as like the middle 50 of there, you want to be in this set. Ideally, you want to be towards kind of like the high end of that middle 50. That shows you have strong scores for that school. That may not apply to everyone. If you are a lightning quick defensive end, you probably can get on a much lower score because you're providing a different service to that school. But just know that this is assuming that the student doesn't have any of these hooks that make it appealing. Is your parents going to donate a building to the campus? You might be able to get it up to lower score. There are different situations. And then as you go through this, like taking practice tests, this is what one of our outsource reports looks like. But you're getting that experience, normalizing the structure of that, and getting that feedback is going to be really important as you go through the testing on there. And a little pitch for what we do. We're ready for this. Our stuff has been all updated for the digital SAT. We've been working real hard on that. We have digital SAT practice tests that give detailed score reports, a lot more information than those 7 bars. You actually can see the questions you got right or wrong. We don't need to do all the sort of behind the scenes algorithmic smoke and mirrors that the College Board needs to do. So we can be, on there. We have a 5th edition SAT book that has been fully updated for the digital SAT. So it even says it on the cover there. And if we got classes that are like starting this December that are set up to for the March digital SAT. So if you like we're in classroom things, we also got plenty of one-on-one tutors that that can work on your schedule and be specific for what your student needs. And using those PSAT scores, can we already jump into like a good game plan. And if you would like to talk to us, we'd love to have one of our advisors talk to you and make a plan. But for tonight, we got some Q&As, and I see we got a good list here. So, and if you have a question, do throw it out there. All right. So someone asked early on, how do you view the missed questions on the PSA? You can't. I tried to answer that in there, but it's no longer a feature of because of that item response scoring. How do we get our student scores? It's at the College Board, collegeboard.org. The student has to have a login in order to have taken the PSAT, so the scores are there, and the scores should be the scores should be available by today, or already today. So what score do you need to apply for the National Merit Scholarship? It depends on the state that you live in. Anonymous attendee, I don't know what state you're in. But knowing that like you should do a Google search for National Merit cutoff for, and then whatever state, and then that will at least give you a good idea. I don't feel like running through all 50 states on there. A score above 220 is good for a lot of places, but not all places. All right. So will the colleges understand what is behind the scoring of a particular student? That's an interesting question. So there's three clients for the SAT, right? There are students, and there are schools that like administer the test, and then there are colleges. And with this digital redesign, they definitely try to make it a better experience for certainly the students, and I think more or less for the schools that administer them, not the colleges, but the high schools. Though I think a lot of them would. There were some hiccups on as the PSAT was given. But what do they do for the colleges? They're basically saying that, look, it's out of 1600 like it always was. They maybe changed some of the inner mechanics, but the product you receive is still the same. So they're kind of hoping the colleges will just say okay and just see it as the same. So I don't know that there are lots of colleges that do use SATs heavily and regularly that are going to are going to really challenge this. But that's something to be seen, right? That's the next step in terms of like the College Board had to convince students that this was a good test, and the schools to offer it, and now for colleges to take it. So interesting question. All right. For the practice with PSAT, I did a practice at College Board and Cotta County practice. What else would you recommend doing to get better at SAT? I think practice tests are great on there, and certainly if you want to take another one, you can sign up for a free practice test on Alpert, and we do give a lot of data back on that. And then look at what kind of questions you're missing, and then plan strategy around that of like the certain question types and looking at that kind of review. That would be my recommendations for improvement. That's also why I went through all the domain types. All right, we discussed if your score suggests you should take the ACT, old SAT, or digital SAT. Okay, so that's a good question, and what's asking is should the ACT, old SAT, or digital SAT? All right. If you have a good digital PSAT score, you should do the digital SAT. The old SAT, it is like it is it's November 16th. If I get my calendar, the paper SAT is being retired on December 2nd, which is in a little more than 2 weeks from now. We're getting to the point where I don't even know if you can register for it. And maybe you can. It definitely would be a late registration. So I didn't talk about the paper old SAT because I think that door is closing, and it hasn't closed entirely, but pretty close. And there is no intent or option of that like reopening. Like they are sunsetting that product, and they have done this. They've changed, the SD has changed quite a few times. And those of you who are parents or counselors in TI will probably know, yes, this is a very different test than maybe the test you took. I don't know that the digital SAT is a good indicator if you should take the ACT, but knowing that if the digital SAT scores could be better, knowing that the ACT is a viable option. And so kind of it's indicator that, oh, maybe you should look elsewhere. And then the best thing to do would be to take a practice ACT. All right. Sounds like it's easier to figure out what parts to focus on or improve your score with the ACT, which that's right. Okay, so it sounds easier to figure out on what parts to focus on, improve your score. Yes, I think in some ways, but the again, there are practice tests where you can get the feedback, like the operative test, and so the PSAT, the official PSAT, is lacking in that. But there are additional practice things where you could learn that. But yeah, the ACT it does provide more feedback on the types of questions you got wrong, and does it where there are official ACTs where you actually can get back your own test form. All right. Between paper SAT and digital, which one is better to submit to college? They are advocating that schools treat them equally. And as far as we can know, schools are just agreeing with that. One thing to remember is that there's actually a pilot program that was like 2 years ago, and I had some students take it, and they were given they took the digital SAT, and they were like that. They were given a valid score, and those kids are already in college. So they've already kind of crossed the threshold. And for there are seniors right now internationally who are applying with these schools. So I don't think that any schools are going to penalize them for taking the digital test versus the paper test, because we've actually already crossed that threshold. If you have great paper SAT scores that you're happy with, congrats. Like, you can stop. Like, you don't have to take the digital test. Good on you. Like, you did good work. If you did the paper one and you want to do better, you're going to have to switch to the digital. That's sort of that's only options I can think of. All right, does one have more weight than the other? I'm assuming it's the SAT versus ACT. There wasn't enough context in there. No, I mean, if I'm misunderstanding your question, feel free to retype it. I'm not sure what we're comparing the weight. Schools don't typically prefer SAT or ACT on there. I think that's what that question was, but if I misunderstood that, if you're comparing two different things in the weights, type in another one. All right, we still got some ones here. What's the advantage of getting national merit if PSAT scores don't count in admission process? The advantage of getting the national merit is, I mean, if you get all the way through, you get money, which is a nice thing. Also, the national merit is it's one of the best things you could have on a college application. It really is like the shiniest of gold stars. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. It is like, wow, it is. Admissions offices notice it, and they're like, "Ooh, we would love to have a national merit scholar." So there's a lot of value in there, and there are things like a famous example is if you get a full national merit recognition, if you just choose to go to Auburn University, it's free. Like, you get a full scholarship and a stipend, which basically means they pay you. So they're paying for your expenses. So that's a pretty good deal, right? Getting paid to go to college. So that's why national merit's valuable in there. So what's the best way to practice SAT? Khan Academy. I mean, I think Khan Academy is great for students that are motivated. It can't provide any kind of feedback that is specific to a person, right? There, I think tutoring is pretty good too. I'll just say that. All right, so hello, my student got a 213 score index in Georgia. Does that mean that he will be in national merit? That's a good score, but probably not. The Georgia's been around 220, 219. I think 213 is a little low for Georgia. That's my predictive. It could still get commended for national, but yeah, I would say that that was good, but probably not in that 1% that they're looking for. Sorry, but clearly the 213 is like the digital test was clicking, so it's not a bad score. It's just like, again, national merit recognition needs to be exceptional. All right, how do we know if the score taken at PC is good or not? I mean, one is that, like, I would say that as your scores get above 500 per section, they are getting better, right? That you're getting better than most students. And as you get up towards 760, there's obviously much more improvement on that. They tell you the percentiles for your grade, and so that's that's one way to look at it. So like in this way, but then I guess the next thing is like, okay, what colleges are you applying to, right? And there you can find off like the range of scores that are typically submitted, and then do the scores align with that, right? That's like, that's a moving target, because do you want to go to like a top tier Ivy League school, go to Stanford or MIT? Those are going to, they're obviously going to have a lot higher scores than many other perfectly good colleges on there. So you need to like make a personal plan. There's not like the good score for all students, right? And I think it's important to start thinking about those, and like, okay, what school would you be happy at? Okay, all right, trying to get these. All right, so there's still some good questions here. I appreciate everyone hanging on, especially Peter. All right, is there a situation where a student could take the paper SAT in the future? Okay, so yes. I didn't bring this up because I have a theory, but so there is a paper-based accommodation that a student can apply for if they have accommodations. It's important that paper-based test is not the test that students have been taking since 2016. It will still have the short passages and the structure, though the linear test is longer modules. And how you get that accommodation is you have to request it and they have to approve it. I heard in a meeting quite a while ago that if you ask for it, they'll basically give it to you. But you have to also wonder like why you want it. So yes, you get to write stuff down, and you have paper and a pencil, and you can underline, whatever you need in there. But you lose Desmos, the graphing calculator, which I think is a huge advantage on math. And I don't know, and you're taking a longer test. You're going to do more questions because the linear test is longer, both in time and number of questions. And you typically, those students would have extended time anyways. You're talking about a much longer testing experience. I think that the College Board is going to try to bury this paper option. But the test with separate reading and writing sections and no calculator and calculator test that is happening here for Saturday in December, that test is closed, gone, no longer an option. You cannot request a old-fashioned test. Hopefully that distinction makes sense there. All right. Experienced students usually score better on the SAT or ACT. In my experience, students are different, and there's not a universal match for every student. And I think the best thing a student can do is try both, and then make what makes sense for that student. And I'm not going to go on and say, oh, that all students should do the SAT or all students do the ACT. I like the fact that students can make a choice. And whatever fits theirs best. I would always defer to the student's preference. All right. For ACT, does SAT matter? I've heard some schools prefer ICSA. I would check on that. That might have been true. I don't know, 5-6 years ago. And I can't think of a school that it's mandatory. A lot of schools don't even they admit they don't look at it. The ACT keeps the essay because it's an additional fee and they make money off of it. That's schools don't really use it. If there was a school that explicitly asked for it, I couldn't name that school. I mean, maybe it exists. I mean, there's hundreds of colleges, right? I'm not a college counselor. I'm a dude that likes to break tests and help kids break tests. So I don't know. I'm definitely not an educational consultant or a counselor or anything like that. But I would say that for almost all circumstances, the ACT essay has no value, and I think them keeping it has to do with the money it makes them versus the value that students receive. Hot take. Do some schools prefer ACT versus SAT? No. There's some schools where they're more common. Some states that tend to be more ACT or more SAT, but they'll accept the test scores either way. You don't need to take a certain test to get into a certain school. Do they super score digital and paper? That's a good question. That is up to individual colleges to do. I know that some schools have said, yeah, it's going to be fine. I know that Princeton said that they won't. So this is going to be something where, and this is true for all super scoring, really. And if you're not sure what I mean by super scoring, I should back up. I'll do a little inside baseball. Super scoring is where like you did better in one section on one test and then better in another section of the other test. They will take the best sections for multiple tests. The ACT is very pro super scoring, and they do their reports where they actually super score in this. So it's going to be up to schools to make that choice, and I can't tell you that uniformly. I think we're going to know a lot more as fall. Like more schools are going to make those opinions. So you just have to check with the schools you're applying to on there. It's a good question though. Is 900 a bad PSAT score for a junior? Well, it's not a national merit score. On there. If I look at a 900, I mean that's somewhere like maybe 500, 400, or 450, 450 on there. I would ask, why did you get that score? Was it did you find the test content challenging? Was the timing tough? Did you not know how to use Blue Book? Is it just a ton of math you have not seen? Or was it something, and I want to be honest, that they were like, that you knew that this test didn't matter. And I'm not saying that to be cruel or anything, but I know that students blow it off, right? And it did, did you take, was that a hard fought 900 is what I'm asking for. I think looking at that, it does not show a strong preference towards the digital SAT, and I would try the ACT before pursuing the digital SAT. And then you get that comparison on there. Okay, so I think that question's asked twice. I think I just answered it for both times. I 3 times now. Okay, that we've talked about the 900 here. Okay. So does the PC commandments look good in college? So you're talking about, so the commandment would be the national merit, and yes, any recognition from national merit is a good thing to put on your college transcripts. It is like there's no downside to it whatsoever. Do you think average student will score higher in the old SAT or the new digital SAT? All things being equal. Great question. I don't know that yet, right? We have a little bit of from international, but I think international is going to be skewed because students who are, going to leave their home country and come to the United States. I mean, they're motivated by nature, right? I mean, that's a harder path for all students to like immigrate, to go to college, and so you like. I don't know that we can compare those, because no one's going to immigrate to go to a, you know, uh, non-flagship school, right? Like, it's you got to think about who's doing this. Um, so I don't know yet. That's we'll know that data, but pretty quickly it's just going to norm out. It's only going to affect current juniors who could have the option of doing both, and most are not going to have done both. They're just going to be doing the digital because they test in the spring, um, and they'll just become a new norm. Like and maybe it fluxes a little bit, but I like if you're a sophomore, it does not matter on there. Ooh, all right, still getting questions here. Are you familiar with a BSMD program where you're accepted to med school from high school? It's in Augusta University. Okay, I do know about that, and I heard that from students that SCS will help you get in, not required, but it helps. Okay. So saying if you want to go to med school into Augusta University, which I'm where one of my former students went there and is now a medical doctor. I, if that's the case, to take the essay. I do not know enough specifically about that program. And the student that I was talking to with, she did the SAT anyway. So, and that was quite a few years ago because she's already a medical doctor. But yeah, okay. I appreciate that info. My student got 222 score next. What does that mean? That means your student did well because 228 is perfect. And depending on the state that you live in, a 222 is a strong contender for national merit, but it depends on the state you live in. I would check the index for whatever state you're in. I don't know. He says anonymous, but 222 is definitely like you should be paying attention for national merit on there, and it also means that the digital SAT is obviously clicking with your student. So congratulations, that's a really good score. Do we have free testing available in Appleworth? Yes. If you you can go to the website tonight, and it says take free practice test, and you just choose digital SAT, and we have a platform you can take it tonight if you wanted. You obviously have to have an account to see your scores, but there's no charges on those. You can take a practice test right now, though it's a little bit late, but you could. Assuming the like free practice test is the same. It's a question. All right, so if my student got a 1520 on the PSAT, is it giving them a national merit? I would think so. It depends on how much that 1520 is on the reading and writing section, and how much of it is on the math. Use that. They give you the national merit index there. That's the score you need to go on. So if it was perfect on math, but you lost the reading, depending on like how that might actually be uncertain, depending on the state. All right, we're going to see. All right, we've got trying to get all these questions done. Is it a good choice to do 3 tests SAT during next year during the summer? So you could there's June and August, so you really couldn't do 3 tests in the summer. They don't offer a July test. But if you want to take June and take August, I mean, and then either you could plan for one before or after. I think that makes sense. In there, either there's an October test, or you could do the May test. But there actually isn't. You couldn't do all 3 in summer. It's just the way it's scheduled. All right. So a parent is a 222 and lives in Alabama. From not looking at the Alabama index there, I would guess that is a good, almost certain national merit qualifying score for Alabama. Alabama is definitely below the average. And I'm not saying that in any with any connotations. So just like that there's a range, right? And so yeah, I would say 222 is would look I think Alabama was like 218, 217 or something. That kind of if there's Alabama's like kind of in the middle of the pack and a little below the 50th percentile, if I could look at all states. So yeah, congrats. That's a really strong score, and I would expect that student to get national recognition. It's going to be months and months before you know anything about that. So don't fret on there. At least how many times we do the SAT? You should do it at least once, but plan for three. I would not plan for more than three. That's over testing is a real thing. You will plateau, and that's just like it's punitive at that point. All right. So when a student gets migration from long laptop screens, could you qualify for paper test combination? So you can't. There'd have to be a medical diagnosis. You can't just say that you can't self-diagnose an IEP. There are ways that you can mitigate this without getting an accommodation where you can actually change the color of the background and the font if you go into the options at the beginning of the test. And then there are also glasses that you can wear. They're blue light blockers and stuff. So perhaps a combination of those two things might help. If you'd have to get a medical doctor and whoever to say that the student cannot look at a screen for 2 hours. And I'm not a medical doctor, but like you can't just say, "Oh, this is how I feel, and therefore I should get it." Right? This is a accommodations are a treatment to a medical condition, and only a doctor can make those determinations. Oh, last couple in here. All right, she got a 56 on the previous SAT, but he doesn't think about taking the test again. This was his first test. Do you recommend he still test 3 times? I would say if you got a 1560 on an SAT, that is a great score. That is a score that will get you into most schools in the nation, and into like honors programs in schools. Unless you are applying to some of the most elite, no, I don't really think I would focus on other things. Congrats, it's a great score. I don't know that getting a 1590 is really going to change a lot of openings on there. Those are really strong scores. Yeah, I mean, can a student be one and done and do great? Absolutely. But very few students are going to get a 1560 even after lots of hard work. All right, but congrats on that. How many times you take the SAT before applying to a college? I would say that 3 is the norm. If you get the score that you want, and then you need to get into colleges, then you're done. And don't fret about it. But speaking of that, I think we're done for tonight. We've got all the questions. Real active Q&A there. So thanks all, and appreciate y'all chatting about this. So have a good night.